If you've been watching this channel for a long time, you'll remember my old motto. It ain't deep, but it's real. This is as real as it gets for me. The last time I was in Toronto, Canada, I sat down to dinner with a white guy. This is a guy with a PhD. He's a university professor. He fancies himself a highly educated person. And he said to me that he considered Taiwan to be a country built on genocide. Right? I grew up in Canada. I currently live in Taiwan. And my immediate reaction was, when I go to the gym every day, I see indigenous people. I see the indigenous people. They work out at my gym. When you go to the gym here in Toronto, do you see any indigenous people? Do you go to a gym that has Cree people, that has Ojibwe people, that has Mohawk people, that has Iroquois people, that has Cayuga people? Does your gym have Inuit people? Do you see them at the gym? Now I went on to say something a little bit more intelligent and composed, but that was my kind of sputtering, enraged statement, right? Now, I used to live in Toronto, obviously. I'm not claiming there are zero indigenous people in Toronto. It's shockingly close to zero, but yes, you will see native people once in a while. In the neighborhood I grew up in, there was one public library that had a little sign up saying that they had a special collection of books for indigenous people. And there was one community center, kind of outreach center, that had a sign up in a First Nations language. All right. So I knew there were these little ghostly reminders that somewhere hidden away in the corners of our society, there were native people, there were indigenous people, right? But not at your gym, right? They may go to some gym, right? But not this guy's gym. This guy's a reasonably wealthy, affluent, highly educated white person living in Toronto. My claim isn't that there's no gym anywhere in Toronto where you'd see the native people. The point is, at the gym you go to, you don't see any native people, right? I go to the most expensive gym in my town in Taiwan, okay? And our native people, our indigenous people, I see them at my gym. And you know what? You can tell right away when you're lifting weights next to them that they're not ethnically the same as the later waves of people who came and settled this island. They do have a colonial history. They do have a history of, shall we say, ethnic tensions and even massacres. But I would not state the island of Taiwan has a genocidal history in the same sense that Canada and Australia do. It's a very different sort of balance that ended up being struck here. Of course, that's not to say I want to whitewash or glorify the history of this island. But yeah, these kinds of things, they really matter. Or what can I tell you? They matter to me. What I feel I've seen happen within my lifetime is this. Number one, I lived through the rise and fall of multicultural policy in Canada. Official, state-sanctioned multiculturalism. People pretended it would solve the racial tensions in our society, and then it fell apart because, of course, it was fundamentally a way to avoid addressing or solving the racial tensions in our society. Okay? There is no way you can compensate for indigenous genocide, the extinction of native peoples and their land rights and their languages. There's no way you can compensate for that by celebrating Korean immigrants and Korean culture, by having a special day for the Chinese Dragon Boat Festival and celebrating Chinese immigrant culture, right? There's no way you can compensate for the history of slavery and genocide and the extinction of those languages and their people by showing how much you appreciate Jamaican culture, which very much was a product of that period of government multiculturalism in Canada. So multiculturalism, was it a solution to our ethnic problems, to our colonial history in Canada? The most remote and worthless appendage of the globe-spanning British Empire? Or was it just a distraction from the ethnic problems? All right? The academic response to the history of black slavery, African American slavery, again, whole African slavery throughout the British Empire, throughout all European empires, Spanish, French. Okay, the academic response to that was well underway in the 1970s. And I think we're seeing the political manifestation of that in the demand for reparations only really emerging now. All kinds of different reasons. There have been all kinds of different distractions in the last 50 years. Let's not attempt to summarize that history here. The academic literature on First Nations slavery, the academic literature on the enslavement and genocide of the native people, American Indians, whatever you want to say, it's just emerged in English within like the last 5 years. And in case you think I haven't been paying attention, I was enrolled as a student of Cree and Ojibwe languages, of First Nations languages, native languages, at First Nations University, Canada. And I went to their library and looked at every book on the shelf. And I went to the National Archives in Montreal and looked at every book on the shelf. I really did survey the state of the literature of what had been published just so many years ago. And now, like 2015 to present, after that all was part of my past, after that all ended in failure, my attempt to learn and study those native languages, now I see this sequence of books coming out. One of them was called The Other Slavery. Another one is called Surviving Genocide. And a whole sequence of specialized studies, some being the earlier Caribbean period, some of them being America after American independence, some of them being British Empire, different emphases, different focus. A couple of these books I've bought. I've purchased now 2 or 3. I did a book review already of The Other Slavery. You guys might remember, okay? Others on the internet, I just looked up interviews with the authors, that sort of thing. And one of the reasons why I'm not interested in all these books is that, of course, each one is kind of repeating the same historical material covered with others. We're seeing now a breakthrough on the academic side that way. And I feel like the mainstream media, with artistic products like the Watchmen series, the new TV show, The Watchmen on HBO, I feel like that's still kind of catching up with the political implications of, really the black liberation struggle, the particular form of the black liberation struggle that started in the 1970s and is only now really being voiced as a demand for reparations. Of course, people talked about it in the 1970s and 1980s, don't get me wrong, but it's maybe only now that's starting to get traction. Guys, when these ideas, there's this old canard, people say there's no force in the world that can stop an idea whose time has come. Right now, finally, Germany is looking at paying reparations for its colonies in Africa. All right? So crimes against humanity, including genocide and other massacres, back when Germany had colonies in mainland Africa. So these weren't black people taken back to Germany, but in Africa. And those are fully 100 years ago. All right? People are putting together the pieces and saying, wait a minute. If reparations were paid to the Japanese who were put into internment camps for just a couple of years, why was it that the liberated slaves, that the descendants of African slaves, why is it that they weren't given reparations? Okay? That's a profound and meaningful question in itself. It's now got to be addressed. But the time is going to come, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon, when the logic of this same question is going to have to be applied to the fundamental historical process of genocide and enslavement that has utterly defined the creation of the United States, Canada, and to varying extents, the whole of Central America, Latin America, and so on, right? And it's not really like there are a whole bunch of different possible answers here, okay? The nature of that genocide is so far advanced that it can't be redressed by turning the clock backwards, right? It's not a problem that can be solved through conservation, because the actual culture you'd be talking about conserving has really already been destroyed. It's going to have to be an historical crime, an atrocity that is redressed through creation, through creativity, not through mere conservation. Okay? When you're talking about languages that are either actually extinct or on the brink of extinction, if you want to bring them back to being spoken in the modern era, you're not talking about conserving a language anymore. You're talking about almost recreating a language, right? You're talking about devoting the resources so that we actually have newspapers that are sold in Cree or Ojibwe or Mohawk, or maybe in a new language created that bridges some of the minor gaps in dialect between East Cree and West Cree, or between OG Cree and Plains Ojibwe and this kind of thing. Whatever it is, so that this actually becomes a language people see on stop signs, on no smoking signs, on the fronts of newspapers, so that instead of celebrating a kind of phony multiculturalism that says, hey, we have Chinese restaurants, and we have Korean restaurants, and we have Jamaican restaurants, therefore we're not racist, therefore we're not responsible for this horrible history of slavery and genocide. That no, you fundamentally re-examine the consequences of colonialism and genocide and say, wait. The challenge of multiculturalism is not ensuring that the ethnically mixed colonists all get to divide up the pie equally, that they all get to divide up the spoils of war, the benefits of the conquest, enslavement, and genocide of the native people. All right? Where instead the question is, wow, how can we redress the total devastation of these people, their culture, even now the traces of their language? And guys, I've done the research, not just the book learning. The statistics you're going to see if you Google it that tell you, there were still 100,000 people who speak Ojibwe, they're all bullshit. All right? Look up right now on YouTube a recent powwow in your area. Okay? Like, I did this recently. You can look up powwow Michigan here on YouTube. You can look up powwow Saskatchewan. The singing, the chanting, right? There are no lyrics. Those songs, historically, if you go back and read anthropological studies and literature, okay, they had lyrics in the native language. They weren't just chanting nonsense words. Yeah, they'd play the drums, they'd chant, they'd dance, but they actually had lyrics in their own language. And what you see today, again and again, at one powwow after another, at one drumming ceremony after another, in one sweat lodge after another, in one, from one location to another, what you see are young people who have native ancestry, who have native blood, and they go through the motions of playing these sacred songs. They behave as if they're chanting, as if they're singing a song, but they're just repeating syllables. It's just like, hey, yeah, yeah, hey, yeah, yeah. They aren't saying anything in any language, because the actual ability to speak or sing or memorize and recite the language really has been lost. When people do surveys like the census, they just ask people, can you speak the native language? There's a sense of pride people have in saying, yes, they are Ojibwe, therefore they speak Ojibwe, where it's a sense of pride. If you actually send out linguists who do speak the language to go out and interview people and establish whether or not they can speak the language, or whether or not they can just say like hello to their grandmother in the language, they can just say 5 words or something, guess what? The findings are very fundamentally different. All right? The ultimate tragedy here, whether we're talking about reparations for American descendants of slaves, or we're talking about reparations for Native people, is that there are some problems you can never fix with money. Now, whether you talk about Black Americans who are descended from slaves or Indigenous people, when you're looking at trillions of dollars, when you look at the amount of money America spent recently conquering Afghanistan and Iraq, like when you're looking at numbers in the trillions, you think, well, what if hypothetically $1 trillion had not been spent conquering Iraq and Afghanistan. What if $1 trillion had gone into this problem, whether for African Americans or Native people or both? You could say, yeah, you know what, that's enough money that could have really made a difference. Like, if Bill Clinton had done that, then what situation would we be in now? And sure, there'd be debt, there'd be economic consequence from it, but there's debt and economic consequences for what the American government actually did with that $1 trillion. But I think we all know the very nature of distributing money. Nobody can ever give you enough money to buy your culture back. Nobody can give you enough money to buy your religion back when Christian missionaries have destroyed indigenous religion. Nobody can ever give you enough money to buy your language back, especially not when every trace of your language has been erased, except for a couple of books that were written by Christian missionaries who were themselves employed in the act of destroying your culture and your religion, right? Nobody can give you enough money to buy your dignity back. But what you can do is give people political power. You can give them seats in the Senate. You can give them seats in Parliament. You can give them seats in government. You can give them a controlling interest in the creative process of now trying to recover, now trying to propound some kind of new indigenous culture. Probably for African Americans too. What's the future of their part of Western civilization? It's not that they want to recapture something that was lost prior to slavery. It's that they want something new and something better, right? I mean, whatever is going to be sorted out, whether it's reparations or otherwise, it has to be fundamentally a forward-looking rather than conservative force in society, right? Who's going to ask those questions and who's going to answer them? Right? That is a challenge that the British tradition of democracy has absolutely never faced, has absolutely never dealt with. All right? When they paid reparations to the Japanese people who were interned in California during World War II, there was absolutely no question of, the Japanese being granted a seat in government, of them having a bigger role in even the state legislature, let alone there was no question of the Japanification of American culture. No. Nobody had any interest. There was no question of creating a future for the Japanese language in America. No, not comparable in these ways. Okay, one of the indigenous languages of California is called Yurok. Yurok with a Y. Y-U-R-O-K. Right? It's directly related to the indigenous languages we have in Canada. It's an Algonquian language. So it's related to Cree and Ojibwe, believe it or not. All right? It just barely exists. It just barely survives at the mouth of one river in California where one tribe is struggling to keep that language alive. Okay? Will the day come when you put your credit card into a bank machine in California and there's a list of languages you can choose from, and Yurok is one of those languages? Is there going to be a future when these people have an integral and important role in the identity of your state, California? And of course, you could ask that question about the Mohawk and the Cree and the Ojibwe in their respective states and provinces as you go across the map. All right? Is that what we're moving towards? Or is everyone just going to accept, under one excuse or another, an inexorable process toward absolute genocide? In many ways, the inventor of the uniquely American form of racism was Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson's obsession was with eliminating African Americans and Native Americans from the writing of history. He personally believed that democracy could not exist or could not survive. His idea of democracy, if they didn't completely extinguish and remove black people and Native people from that history, right? It's the ultimate absurdity. It's ridiculous. I end this video with absolutely no hope that the next generation is going to do a better job than the last one. I end this video with absolutely no hope that the mistakes made in the name of multiculturalism won't be repeated again. Because the real poison of multiculturalism is the idea that everyone being equal is a pretext to never address the grievances of any particular group of people. And that dangerous delusion is with us still, and in 2019, it's more powerful than ever. The idea that, well, everybody's equal, so how could we bend the rules to solve this problem with this particular group of people? Take a look at historically black universities in the United States of America. I've done this research recently. It's not worth describing why I did. Take a look at the reality of America's historically black universities. And now take a look at the reality of the American Indian colleges, the indigenous American universities. If you didn't know they were there, Google it. They all have Wikipedia articles. You might be surprised. Contrast that to the reality of white American universities, whether you look at state colleges or Ivy League colleges, what have you, right? The reality in 2019 is not that we're starting addressing an equal population or a problem of equality, okay? We're in a situation where we're living in a hole created by the history of the British Empire and a hole even in our historical awareness created precisely by the overt conspiracy of ignorance fostered by people like Thomas Jefferson.